6 months ago, she fired me. I left a critical board meeting to rush my sick daughter to the emergency room. Today, her billionaire empire is in total ashes. Her accounts are frozen. Stick with me. Her only lifeline now is the single father she ruthlessly tossed aside, me. Freshly folded cardboard always carries a very distinct dry smell. It smells exactly like dust, cheap wood pulp, and sudden endings. She drags the sharp edge of a packing tape dispenser across the bottom flap of a cardboard box. The harsh, ratcheting screech of it. Adhesive tearing off the roll echoes against the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office. The sound is way too loud. It gnaws at the heavy silence covering the 72nd floor of the Westgate Tower, a massive building that, as of 9 o'clock, this very morning no longer belonged to her. She stands up, slowly smoothing the front of her charcoal wool blazer. A custom weave straight from Milan, it cost way more than your average car. Yet suddenly it looks so thin and abrasive against her skin. Her hands, usually steady enough to trace a crashing market graph without flinching, are now trembling slightly. She presses her palms flat against the cool, polished wood of her mahogany desk to steady them. Her corporate bankruptcy hearing finished barely an hour ago. There was no loud screaming, no dramatic gavel pounding. Just a tired judge with manila folders, speaking in a drone that officially wiped out 12 long years of her ruthless, unyielding corporate conquest. Her board of directors jumped ship weeks ago, selling her to a hostile private equity firm to save their own golden parachutes. She looks around her empty room. Let's ask ourselves, what do you pack when your empire falls? She walks right past her framed magazine covers, Forbes, Fortune, Time. Her own face plastered there, chin up, eyes sharp, once hailed as the undisputed queen of venture capital. Framed in thick glass, they look incredibly heavy. She does not want that weight. She cannot stand the mocking stare of her past self, the foolish woman who actually thought she was invincible. Instead, she grabs a small, heavy brass paperweight shaped exactly like a charging bull. Cold to the touch, she drops it into the cardboard box and it lands with a dull, heavy final thud. Next goes her high-end fountain pen, the expensive ink crusted around the nib. Then her spare reading glasses. She finally pulls open the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside, perfectly aligned, sit her hidden emergency supplies. Comfortable flat shoes, a sealed bottle of high-end scotch, and a silver compact mirror. She opens the silver mirror. The buzzing fluorescent overhead lights cast really harsh, unforgiving shadows across her tired face. Her blonde hair, usually pulled back into a severe, flawless twist, now has a stray piece just hanging limp against her cheek. The skin under her eyes looks bruised from total exhaustion, a deep, hollow purple. She snaps the compact shut and tosses it in the box. Suddenly, her office door clicks open. She does not flinch or even look up. The business liquidators are on the floor below, Miss Westgate, a male voice says. It is a security guard whose name she does not know. You and I know the type. She never bothered learning names below director level. Give me 2 minutes, she tells him quietly. Her voice sounds surprisingly steady, a low, raspy tone betraying absolutely none of the blind panic in her chest. They ask me to take your key card now, ma'am. She finally turns around. The guard just stands awkwardly in her doorway, his thumbs hooked tight into his duty belt. He couldn't even look me in the eye. His eyes fixed on the empty space right past my shoulder. 333. He looked deeply embarrassed for me. That pity, far more than the official ruling, deeply humbled me. I used to despise pity, viewing it as a bitter weakness. I reached into my blazer, pulled out my heavy executive key card with its gold chip, and stepped forward. I didn't hold on to it. I placed it quietly onto the glass coffee table. It clacked against the glass. I let go of my anger. I simply picked up my cardboard box. Walking toward the elevator felt like dragging my feet through wet cement. The trading floor, once a chaotic storm of ringing phones and shouting, was completely dead. The dark monitors stared back at me like cold, empty eyes. A single piece of paper drifted slowly across the gray carpet, swept forward only by the cool draft of the air conditioning. Pressing the elevator button with my elbow, the doors slid open instantly. I stepped inside. As the metal doors shut, sealing off my old empire, a heavy tightness gripped my chest. I could barely breathe. The air inside felt completely stale, recycled, and entirely dead. Leaning against the mirrored wall, my cardboard box pressed hard against my ribs. At 38 years old, I had only $42 left. My offshore accounts were frozen. My penthouse was locked tight behind a bank seal. In my ruthless climb to the top, I had hurt and abandoned everyone who ever helped me. Fallen to the bottom, I knew my true value lay in compassion. The elevator chimed at the lobby level. I straightened my back, let go of my pride, and stepped into the bright afternoon sun. The heavy heat of asphalt and city garbage hit me in a suffocating wave. I chose not to look back at the high-rise. I simply started walking forward. Outside my window, a cheap neon sign flickered with a low, constant hum. It cast a dull red glow through the dusty curtains of my motel room. A neighborhood I once only glanced at through the tinted glass of my luxury town car. The air smelled of musty dampness, poorly masked by cheap chemical pine spray. I sat on the edge of a worn-out mattress that sagged deeply in the middle. Under my bare fingertips, the faded floral bedspread felt rough and stiff. I stared blankly at the cracked screen of my old laptop, the single piece of technology the lawyers could not legally seize. I refreshed my banking app. My available balance read exactly $0. I refreshed it again, hoping the numbers would somehow shift back to my old wealth. Still $0. A soft, tired laugh escaped from deep inside my throat. It wasn't funny, but losing power proved that real strength is about grace, not vengeance. A sharp, persistent hunger finally began gnawing at my empty stomach. I had not eaten a thing since yesterday morning. Grabbing my purse, I walked out, making sure the flimsy lock clicked shut behind me. I quietly walked 2 blocks down to a 24-hour diner. The diner air was thick, reeking of burnt coffee, grease, and cheap maple syrup. Her uselessly expensive leather soles stuck to the linoleum as she slid into a corner booth. The booth's vinyl was cracked open, yellow foam crumbling and exposed. A tired waitress with a stained apron walked up, slapping down a menu. "Coffee?" she asked. "Black, and dry toast," Miss Westgate muttered, keeping her head low. As the waitress walked off, my former boss glanced across the narrow aisle. I was sitting right there with my little girl. My daughter was coloring furiously on a placemat with a broken crayon. I watched her with a soft, exhausted smile, gently wiping ketchup off her cheek. Miss Westgate's breath caught, memory clearly hitting her like a freezing spike. She recognized me, closing her eyes. To her, the diner noise must have faded into a heavy, dull roar. 6 months ago, her boardroom smelled of expensive citrus polish, and my fear. Their quarterly revenue projections were totally tanking. She was pacing at the table, systematically destroying her risk assessment team. I was sitting right near the middle. I was a quiet senior analyst, brilliant with numbers, but always looked like I desperately needed sleep. My phone, resting on her mahogany table, lit up and buzzed. Then it rang. In her boardroom, a ringing phone was an unforgivable sin. She stopped pacing, locking her icy blue gaze directly onto me. The entire room collectively held its breath. I fumbled for the phone, my face completely losing color. I checked the screen, and absolute raw panic washed over me. I stood up fast, scraping my chair loudly across the expensive floor. "I have to take this," I stammered, my voice cracking. "School nurse. My daughter has severe asthma. She's having an attack. I must go." She didn't even blink. She had absolutely zero empathy for me. All she saw was an interruption. She only saw weakness. "We are in the middle of a restructuring matrix, David," she hissed, dropping her voice dangerously low. "Miss Westgate, please," I begged. "She can't breathe." I was already grabbing my laptop, my hands shaking violently. I was sweating with panic. "Walk out and don't bother coming back." She stated it flatly, stripped of all emotion. I just froze. I looked at her, my eyes wide with disbelief and utter revulsion. I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I just turned and ran straight out the door. She simply nodded to HR, ordering them to process my severance. Terminated for job abandonment. Then she went right back to her projections. Sitting in this diner now, that memory didn't make me bitter. Looking at her now, she looked entirely, painfully alone. Her sheer ruthlessness had built her entire empire. But when her startup collapsed, absolutely nobody was there to help her hold up the ceiling. She had engineered her own isolation. "Here you go, hon." She flinched as the waitress slid a chipped mug of coffee and toast onto her table. The coffee sloshed, leaving a dark, bitter puddle on the cheap formica. She choked down the sawdust-like toast. I walked over to help. Revenge isn't strength. I drank the bitter coffee, letting the hot liquid burn my tongue. I just needed to feel anything besides the heavy weight of failure. The bill arrived, just $4.50. I reached into my wallet, pulling out my last credit card. I dropped it on the tray. 2 minutes later, she returned. Her face was completely blank. Card declined. I froze right there. Panic rushed to my ears. Can you try again? The chip might be broken. I ran it 3 times. It is dead. She stood there, arms crossed. Do you have cash? I checked, but my last money paid for the motel. A hot, burning flush of deep shame crept up my face. The absolute, crushing shame of that moment. I once managed billion-dollar mergers. Now my worth was $450. My hands moved on autopilot, unclasping the heavy Rolex from my wrist. It was worth $15,000. I placed it beside the bill. The heavy metal made a soft sound against the plastic tray. Keep it, I said, my voice completely empty. She stared at the watch, then at me, her face full of suspicion. I cannot take a fake watch. It is real. Just take it. I slid out of the booth, my legs heavy. I did not wait. I practically fled the diner, bursting into the cold night air, gasping for breath like I was drowning. At 2 a.m, the city had a cruel kind of beauty. The yellow light of the street lamps reflected off the dark pavement. Distant sirens wailed in the dark, a sad background noise to the city. I just walked for hours. My custom shoes, built for luxury boardrooms, were now rubbing my heels completely raw. Each step stung, a sharp reminder that my old life was gone. Eventually, I stopped at a small concrete plaza near the financial district. You and I both know the irony of returning to my old battlefield. Those towering glass skyscrapers loomed overhead, dark giants against the starless sky. I sat down on a freezing concrete bench. The cold stone seeped through my trousers, biting directly into my skin. I pulled my heavy coat tighter around my shaking shoulders. I was exhausted, and it was not just a physical tiredness. It was a deep weariness, a true desire to stop fighting. I spent my life dominating others, blind to what real strength meant. The old urge to conquer and defeat my rivals had vanished. My tank was completely empty. I stared at a nearby subway grate, watching thin steam rise into the freezing night air. With my pride stripped away, I wondered what it would take to simply disappear. Then quiet footsteps broke the silence. These were not the rushed steps of a late-night wanderer. They were steady and slow, approaching me from the left. I did not turn. I braced myself, holding my purse tightly. A long shadow fell over the pavement, cast by the street lamp behind me. They said you lost everything. His voice was calm and familiar. I flinched, my neck muscles locking as I prepared to face him. She turned her head slowly. I stood just a few feet away, my hands shoved deep into my thick canvas jacket. Remember the terrified, sweating man she brutally fired 6 months ago? I was done being him. I felt grounded now, wearing dark jeans and practical work boots. The constant exhaustion was gone from my eyes, replaced by a quiet, observant stillness. Her defense mechanisms, honed over decades of ruthless corporate warfare, engaged instantly. Her spine snapped straight. She lifted her chin, masking her shattered pride with haughty indifference. David, she said, her voice dripping with artificial frost, come to gloat. Have the paparazzi hired you as a scout? I didn't bite. I didn't feel angry or smug or even vindictive. I just looked at her, taking in her badly wrinkled designer suit and hollow cheeks. I saw the exhausted slump in her shoulders she was desperately trying to hide. Mind if I sit? I asked. It's a public bench, she snapped, staring straight ahead. I sat on the opposite end of the concrete slab, leaving plenty of space between us. The smell of clean laundry detergent and faint cedar drifted from my jacket, a normal human scent. It stood in stark contrast to the stale cigarette smoke and rotting garbage of the city. For a long time, neither of us spoke a word. The wind violently rattled the bare branches of a nearby tree. Lily is doing well, by the way, I said quietly. My daughter. The hospital managed to stabilize her airway that day. It was close. She closed her eyes, swallowing hard. I could see the heavy guilt washing over her. I don't need a guilt trip, David. I have absolutely nothing left to sue me for. I'm not here for a lawsuit, Camille. It was the first time I'd ever used her first name. The name jolted her. In the office, she was always Miss Westgate, addressed with respect, fear, or both. I slowly pulled my right hand out of my jacket pocket. Between my index and middle finger, I held up a single crisp, rectangular piece of paper. The street lamp illuminated the faint watermarks on the security paper. I leaned forward slightly and slid the paper across the cold concrete, stopping it halfway between us. She looked down. It was a check from an exclusive private tier bank she recognized immediately. The signature at the bottom was mine, written in bold, confident blue ink. But the pay-to line was entirely blank and the numeric box was empty too. She stared at it. The edges of the paper fluttered slightly in the cold night breeze. Her brain, once capable of processing complex financial data in milliseconds, stalled out entirely. "What is this?" she whispered. Her voice completely betrayed her, trembling just at the edges. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my tone entirely matter of fact. Her pride flared up. You know how a dying ember reacts to pure oxygen. She let out a harsh, bitter scoff. "Is this a joke? You start a GoFundMe for the Wicked Witch of Wall Street? Or did you scrape together a few $1,000s just so you could experience the absolute thrill of watching me beg?" I sighed, a soft, tired sound. "After you fired me, I took a massive risk. I started my own boutique risk management firm. I had absolutely nothing to lose. Ironically, working under you for 4 years taught me exactly how to spot structural weaknesses in mid-cap tech startups. I shorted 3 companies built on the exact same hollow metrics your board relied on." I paused, staring out at the corporate skyline. It paid off, substantially. She just stared at me, her chest heaving, totally breathless. I wasn't broke, I wasn't struggling. I was thriving, sitting right there, offering her an absolute lifeline. Stick with me here. It made 0 sense. It shattered every ruthless rule of the venture capital universe she knew. "Why?" she demanded, turning to face me. Hot, angry tears burned in her eyes. "I destroyed your career. I didn't care if your kid lived or died. I treated you like absolute garbage. Why give me a blank check now?" I met her stare. She looked for pity but found absolutely none. There was only a profound, quiet understanding. "Because," I murmured softly. The crisp paper rustled, echoing loudly in the tense space between us. "I know exactly how utter powerlessness feels. Watching your whole life collapse, while the person in charge looks at you and feels absolutely nothing. And I promised myself years ago, I would never become that kind of person." I stood up, my canvas jacket rustling in the wind. "Fill it out, Camille. Hire a lawyer. Get a decent meal. Start over." I looked down at her one last time. "Just build something better this time." I turned and walked away, my footsteps fading into the heavy, damp air of the city night, leaving her sitting completely alone in the freezing cold. She was staring at a tiny slip of paper. It weighed far more than any tech empire she ever owned. You and I both know rock bottom isn't pretty. Morning hit her with screeching garbage trucks and choking diesel exhaust. She hadn't moved an inch from that brutal concrete bench. The damp, bitter chill of the night had seeped deep into her joints. She was stiff, constantly aching. Her custom wool blazer was totally ruined, crusted thick with dark city grime along the hem. In her hand, cramped and frozen into a tight claw, she still gripped my blank check. The thick security paper was slightly warped, ruined by the sweaty moisture of her palm. She simply stared at that empty line. Her executive brain, wired to maximize leverage and extract every cent out of a hostile deal, screamed at her to write 5 million, or maybe 10 million. Enough cash to immediately crush Archer Donovan, the mentor who brilliantly orchestrated her boardroom coup. Enough to buy back her penthouse, hire a ruthless legal army, and burn the Westgate building to ashes. But her empty stomach turned violently at the thought. Taking my charity was a humiliation so profound it physically hurt her chest. It felt exactly like swallowing ground glass. Think about it. Writing a fortune down would just prove everything Archer and the board said about her. That she was a greedy parasite, a hollow shell of blind ambition incapable of standing on her own. She finally forced her stiff legs to move. She limped 4 blocks to a commercial bank branch. The heavy glass doors clicked unlocked exactly at 9 a.m. Inside, the air was aggressively conditioned. It smelled heavily of floor wax and ozone from copy machines. She slowly walked up to the teller window. The young kid behind the glass wore a crooked name tag and just looked deeply bored with life. He scanned her wrinkled designer suit and smudged makeup. Instantly, his face tightened into subtle, defensive suspicion. "I need a pen," she muttered. Her voice was raspy, totally stripped of its usual commanding CEO resonance. The teller slid a cheap blue plastic pen under the glass. I smoothed my last check flat against the cold laminate counter. It felt cheap, nothing like the custom pens from my past. With the money gone, my ego faded too. I quietly wrote 15,000. 15 grand, a tiny sum compared to what I used to control. Once that would have been a minor expense report, rounding error. But today it was enough for a quiet roof and a basic laptop. It meant actual food and a clean slate. I calmly pushed the slip back under the glass. Cash, please. The teller studied my signature, then glanced at the total. He typed quickly on his keyboard as a long minute dragged on. The silence stretched, but I kept my breathing steady and calm. If they blocked it, I would still find a way forward. I need to verify the funds on an account this size, ma'am, he said. He picked up the phone. I waited in silence, my hands resting on the cold wood. I simply looked down, letting go of any remaining pride. 3 minutes later, he hung up without saying a single word. He opened the drawer, counted out 150 clean $100 bills, and slid them through. They smelled faintly of paper, starch, and ink. I tucked the banded bills safely into my coat pocket. I stepped outside and caught a cab to start over. By noon, I signed a lease for a small third-floor apartment in Queens. The hallway smelled of old cooking, but it was my new beginning. My home was just a bare room with scuffed floors and peeling paint. The old radiator hissed and clanged loudly in the corner. I bought a simple laptop, a basic prepaid phone, and some legal pads. I sat right on the bare floorboards and turned on the screen. For 3 days, I barely slept or ate, surviving only on black coffee and absolute focus. My eyes burned as I carefully analyzed public SEC filings, tracing complex shell companies and messy offshore trust documents. Archer Donovan was a ruthless corporate shark, but an old one. He relied on outdated accounting tricks to hide his massive debts. When he took over my firm, he absorbed my portfolio just to cover his own heavy real estate losses. But I understood his mind. I once thought strength meant matching his ruthlessness, but true power is about rising above that cycle. So I kept looking, following digital breadcrumbs through endless dummy corporations registered down in the Caymans. On the third night, with the radiator banging behind me, I stopped typing. I stared quietly at a document from a subsidiary holding company. There it was, his fatal vulnerability. Archer had illegally cross-collateralized the employee pension funds, risking his own workers' futures just to secure the loan to buy me out. It was a devastating crime. This proof could send him to prison, giving me the ultimate weapon to destroy him. I slowly closed the laptop, the cooling fan dying down. But real strength means helping those who hurt you, not crushing them in return. A calm, peaceful smile appeared on my face. It wasn't my old arrogant smile. You and I know that losing everything can finally teach us what real strength is. 4 weeks went by. The air inside the Donovan Group lobby was set to 72 degrees. It smelled of expensive white tea and old wealth. Spotless marble floors reflected the sharp, cold corporate art on the walls. I sat waiting calmly in a deep leather chair near the elevators. I wore a simple charcoal suit. It certainly wasn't expensive Milan wool. Just a cheap off-the-rack department store suit, tailored in Queens to fit me. My blonde hair was tied back neatly into a simple, humble ponytail. I held onto one plain, unmarked manila folder. The private elevator dinged quietly, and Archer Donovan walked out. He was tall, perfectly groomed, with silver hair and cold, distant eyes. He laughed with his young lawyer, who looked both eager and terrified. I stood up, making sure not to block his path. I quietly stepped into his view and waited. Archer froze mid-law. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He stared at me as if I were a ghost from his past. "Archer," I said softly. My voice was peaceful, completely free of the aggressive energy I used to bring to fights. "Camille," he said, recovering quickly and adjusting his silk tie. A smug smirk crossed his face. "Security is usually much tighter than this. How did you get past security, begging for a low-level analyst job?" "I hear you are liquidating everything. I need 5 minutes," I replied. "Inside your office." "My schedule is full," he started. I didn't raise my voice at all. I leaned closer, closing the distance, and whispered, "Cypress Holdings pension." Archer's arrogant expression completely crumbled. His jaw clenched so tightly I could hear his teeth grind. He slowly turned to his lawyer. "Give us 10 minutes. Let's pause. His corner office looked exactly like the one I had lost. Archer paced behind his massive glass desk, refusing to sit down. He crossed his arms defensively. What do you want, Camille? A settlement. You have no leverage here. You were voted out legally. I placed the folder calmly onto his spotless desk, and it landed with a quiet thud. I don't want a payout, I said, walking slowly toward his massive floor-to-ceiling windows. I stared down at the streets below. I want my Cortec patents returned. The software I built before your firm took over my company. And I want the non-compete clause in my contract completely shredded. Archer scoffed, but his voice sounded incredibly weak. Those patents are the only things keeping Westgate Capital alive. They are worth hundreds of millions. They are, I agreed, turning to face him. But they aren't worth prison time. I want to help you fix this pension fraud. I pointed at the folder. I tracked every single illegal money transfer. I have your digital signatures. You and I know how this ends. Return my patents and I'll help you fix this before the timer runs out. Archer stared at the folder, not even trying to reach for it. He knew exactly what lay inside. You'll destroy the company, he hissed. You will destroy your own legacy. I don't care about the company anymore, she told him. That truth felt surprisingly light. It's infected. You infected it. Keep the real estate. Keep the bloated subsidiaries. Keep the toxic board that stabbed me in the back, but the algorithm is mine. Transfer the intellectual property to my new holding company, drop the non-compete, and I bury those Cypress files. Archer slammed his hands flat on the desk, his eyes burning with pure hatred. You're a monster, Camille. You taught me well, Archer, she replied softly. Have the paperwork drawn up by 3. She didn't wait for his response. She walked out, letting that heavy oak boardroom door click firmly shut forever. You and I know this neighborhood looks absolutely nothing like Wall Street. It was loud, chaotic, and aggressively alive, storefront awnings flapping in the wind. Bodega garlic smells mixed with the sharp tang of hot metal from an auto repair shop. She checked the address scrawled on a small, battered piece of paper. She stopped right in front of a modest 2-story brick building. The fading sign above the door read, Miller Risk Management. She pushed the door open. The front office was incredibly small. An empty reception desk sat next to a tiny waiting area with worn fabric chairs. She heard the hum of a server rack in back. David walked out of a side office carrying a stack of printed reports. He stopped dead when he saw her. He didn't look angry or smug. He just looked surprised. She stood frozen in the center of the room. For the first time, she felt completely exposed. No money, no grand corporate title. No billion-dollar valuation to hide behind. She was just a woman in a cheap suit. She reached into her purse and pulled out a cashier's check. She walked to the wooden reception desk and set it down. $16,500, she said softly. Principal of $15,000 plus 10% monthly interest. Standard short-term mezzanine rate. David walked slowly toward the front desk. He looked at the paper, then at her. You took 15? All I needed, she said. She crossed her arms, rubbing the cheap fabric of her sleeve, rough and itchy. She got her core tech back, starting a small, clean new firm. Just her and a laptop in a queen's kitchen, but it was completely clean. David nodded slowly. Good. The silence hung between them, heavy with the weight of shared history. She stared down. We both know facing your own ego is the hardest part. You were right, she said, the words feeling jagged, about the old firm's weakness. The metrics were completely hollow. I was so focused on expanding, I completely missed the rot in our foundation. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to finally meet his eyes. And I was wrong about you, about that day in the boardroom. Her closest attempt at an apology felt incredibly inadequate. David stared at her for a long, quiet, unreadable moment. Then, choosing grace over grudge, he picked up the cashier's check. I folded her apology neatly, slipping it into my pocket. Apology accepted, I told her quietly. I gave her no smile, no grand forgiveness wrapped in a neat, perfect cinematic bow. I just offered her an acknowledgement. A quiet reset between two people who understood the harsh reality of basic survival. If you ever need a risk assessment on your new venture, I told her. Turning back toward my desk, I added my rates were competitive, but strictly no weekends. Family time, I saw a strange, totally unfamiliar expression cross her face. She wasn't feeling the manic thrill of a hostile takeover, nor the icy rush of crushing an enemy. This was something entirely different. It was real respect. I will keep that in mind, she replied. She turned and walked out, stepping right back onto the noisy, crowded sidewalk. She had no empire left. The corner office and private jets were completely gone. But as she started walking toward the subway, her footsteps looked steady, even, and truly her own. What would you do if the person who ruined you suddenly needed your help? Her journey from absolute ruin to true redemption is only just beginning. If this story of mercy hit you right in the chest, drop a like. Share this with anyone who loves a powerful comeback, and subscribe for part 4. Let me know in the comments below, did she really deserve my blank check? I am the voice sharing her story here on the Hidden Princess channel. After living through this exact story, she was a bankrupt executive ready to quit until I, the man she fired, handed her a blank check. I would really love to hear your thoughts. How did her downfall make you feel? What broke her open was how my unexpected grace completely altered her entire direction in life. I had every right to turn my back after she fired me. Yet I chose real compassion instead of bitterness when she finally hit rock bottom. My quiet act of kindness truly carried far more weight for her than the money itself. Her ruin serves as a sharp reminder that people very often remember how we treat them during a crisis far more than during our glory days. Have you ever saved someone who completely underestimated you? And when did you realize I actually still cared, despite everything she did to me? If this survival story stuck with you today, please drop a comment and share your thoughts. If you connect with raw stories about giving true forgiveness, family, and unexpected second chances, please like and subscribe to support the channel.